Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this conversation. My name is Charles Tessou, and with Pierre-Alexandre Matteo, we are the Conversation of Art Basel Paris co-curators. We are thrilled to welcome a sterling panel of artists and writers to discuss the importance of the ugly, the grotesque, and the bad in contemporary art. The talk will be in English, and we would be really thankful if you could switch off your phone. Last but not least, there won't be any question at the end. Thank you very much for your understanding.
Thank you very much for inviting me, Charles and Pierre-Alexandre, and for Jamian and Diego for joining us. My name's Paul Clinton. Before we start, I'm just going to say a few words to kind of map out some of the territory. There'll be the name of a few theorists in there, but don't worry, my questions will not be theoretical, or it won't be an exam in art history. So I want to start by saying that I didn't know whether I should feel delighted or insulted to be asked to host a panel on ugliness and the grotesque and the bad in contemporary art. But then again, if I start with a cheesy kind of joke like that, I think that tells me all I need to know about my own bad taste. Then again, just as offensive as being called ugly or disgusting is the fear in our current censorious times of being perceived as the kind of judgmental person who accuses others of being disgusting, bad, or ugly. The queer thinker Jonathan Dollimore has argued that rather than openly expressing our sexual disgust, we tend to use coy euphemisms like preference or aversion. And if we think of ourselves as politically progressive, we might even express our disgust at the disgusted, who we accused of being cruel or narrow-minded or bigoted, while congratulating ourselves on our superiority. The problem then isn't that disgust goes away, it's just that most of us won't admit to it. Baudelaire argued that you can't have beauty without ugliness, and that art should be independent of the beauty of nature. Something that freed artists to engage in caricatures showing the inhumanity of humanity. For Freud, feelings of disturbance, such as the uncanny, were the return of the repressed, perhaps even a repressed desire, come back to us, the familiar now made strange, or strangely familiar. For Bataille, disgust was a social roadblock, preventing us from our more self-destructive desires. Whichever version of this you believe, it's not only my boyfriends and my dates that think that desire and disgust are easily confused. After all, both are all about proximity, intimacy to something that feels either exciting or threatening, often because of its surface or sensuous qualities, which may either penetrate or contaminate. For Kristeva, the horrors of abjection threaten the stability of the boundaries between me and the not me, between self and other. And certainly many artists have played with the ability of horror to disturb those boundaries. So the bad and the ugly then are about borders, enforced more than troubled by the threat of transgression. These borders are, of course, also political and about relations of power, of othering, of exclusion, of class distinction. You don't need to read Pierre Bourdieu to realize that judgments of bad taste are usually judgments about people rather than objects, about distinguishing myself as somebody sophisticated from those who are low, who give in to bodily, easy, crass, or vulgar pleasures. And to object certainly means to cast out, to cast somebody as dirty or other or polluting. Although for Jean Genet, the subject of another talk in this series, to be abjected, to be cast out or treated like shit, was a kind of absolution, a way of escaping one's responsibility to the moral, social, or state laws. And there are all kinds of ways in which we can re-embrace the disgusting, treating it as humorous or engaging in a critique of it, although the problem of critique, when applied to the base, to the ugly, to the disgusting, or the grotesque, is that even when our aim is at criticizing power, we may end up criticizing forms of low or popular consumption in an elitist or judgmental manner. Perhaps and then we're back in the problem of expressing disgust at the disgusted, of taking the feeling that appears to invade us physically and expelling it out onto others, as if to say, not me, reinforcing a distinction. Perhaps what we need to do is find ways of allowing ourselves the vulnerability of being disgusted and feeling disgusting, as well as to think of those as operations rather than qualities of people or things. Lecture over. So maybe one of the places I could start, so the first question I could ask you is, what is the role of the bad, the ugly, or the grotesque? It's a big question today, and for artists today. I know, for example, that John Waters, the famous director of Pink Flamingos, doesn't use the term bad taste anymore because he argues it's lost its subversive bite, given that vulgarity and crassness are now seen as part of a right-wing populist culture, for example. And so but then again, you know, we live in a world that's egalitarian, where ideas of class or inequalities of power or disgust have gone away. So I just wonder if you could talk about maybe why engage in horror, or why engage in the vulgar or the ugly or the grotesque now? And what is your experience of the reception of that kind of work? Do you experience resistance to it?
I don't think it's my problem to think about it.
Whose problem is it?
Whoever's like, you know, someone else's decision. Like, I'm just supposed to make the thing. If I start thinking about that, what's the point, you know? I feel like taste and class and all of those things are kind of inconsequential when it comes time to make the work or whatever the fuck you're doing. You know what I mean? It's like assuming too much.
Right.
Yeah, I have to say that Jamian said it pretty precise also for me, to be honest. Yeah. Yeah, also because sometimes, for example, on a very private and personal level also, I notice that many things I find nice or cute and so are completely the opposite for some others, so...
Totally.
Yeah.
But have either of you encountered any resistance to your works, for example, to either their explicitness or their engagement with taboo imagery? Do you think that we live in very censorious times or not?
I mean, for me, all the time, because I make paintings, you know, and paintings are basically, they're backdrops for real life, but they're also incredibly decorative, you know? So how do you have painting transcend itself? You know what I mean? And I feel like, I know, like, with my work, like, the work I make, my personal taste, I would not put it in my apartment. I wouldn't want to look at it, you know what I mean? And that's fine because, you know, I view my work as, like, the reason why I make what I do is because it belongs, it's supposed to be, like, viewed by other people, and it's supposed to be about experience, not the object, you know? And you know, I kind of, it's like a little backhanded trick because, you know, I'd like to treat this stuff as institutional because it would destroy someone's living room. And that's my excuse.
So your main business is ruining dinner parties at collectors, right? Okay.
Totally. Give someone something to talk about, you know? Yeah. If I want to, like, put it at baseline, but I feel like all the time, you know? Like, what I paint doesn't mean I necessarily like it. That has nothing to do with it, you know? So they just end up looking the way they do, and it's, like, out of my control. And sometimes I look at it and I'm like, what the fuck? You know, and I'm shocked that I even got to that point, but that means I'm doing something. If I'm forcing myself to do something that I know is fucked up, but I have to do it for the art, and I have to take a hit, I'll do it, you know?
Are you concerned whether you like it or anybody else does?
Yeah, no, actually, exactly, because I don't, basically, I actually, at the opposite, I do films that I think I would love to see myself, and that's it. Not thinking of any audience, also because this will be really, in my case, a limit, for example. Yeah. So, and the question was if I met sometimes a reaction to No, what I noticed that happens to me and disturb me a bit is when because certain films or videos of mine have to do maybe with painful states of psycho-emotional painful states of being humans. Sometimes people that have the chance to approach me, maybe in an opening or something like that, like comes to me with like questions, not about the work, but like about their pain, about their suffering, and this is something very disturbing. That like if the artist should provide. You know, certain, you know what I mean. I'm not expressing myself very well in this
moment. Almost like you're a kind of public therapist, and they're trauma dumping, and you're there to sympathise. Or is that what you mean? Or
without being judgmental or arrogant regard to, of course, the suffering of any people, but just the fact that it's curious that, you know, for example, I do films I wanted to see, and some people then see them and say, and feel to come and maybe say how I should, you know,
One characteristic, and we've talked about kind of ugliness and the visceral so far, but one quality of both your work is a kind of combination of contrasting feelings. So maybe if we look at a work, should be somewhere along here, like Elvis and Me, your painting, Jamian, is incredibly almost kitschy and sugary sweet image of the king, and yet there's this uncanny doubling of you and him, and you're grabbing his crotch, you know, as many of us would like to have done. And then Diego, you know, you also mix the kind of sweet and the dark. I'm thinking of The Parents' Room, where you set a familial murder-suicide as a musical. I'm just wondering what it is about that kind of contrast in those works, that why you chose to embrace the sweet and the ugly.
Well, I think for me, when I make something, I try to think of, like, it's really dumb, but you think of like a map of a tongue, you know? So I don't know, there's like 5 different parts of your tongue. There's like, you know, salty, sweet, bitter, sour, umami, which umami is whatever the fuck it is, you know? And I feel like if you can hit 3 out of 5 of those notes, it means that it's doing something. You can hit maybe 4, it's really doing something. Maybe 5 could be too much, you know? But with that Elvis and Me painting, it hits several levels because A, it's like, it's really stupid, you know? It also looks like clickbait, which is really important, you know, because painting is for stupid people, which is real, you know? And also that painting, I mean, for me, when I make something, it's how flippant I talk about it, it's incredibly personal. Mm-hmm. So that painting was based off of another painting with an artist that I did a show with at my gallery, who I've been following for 10 years. Mm-hmm. But does it matter if you know this shit? Not really. You know, it's just a dumb painting of me grabbing Elvis's crotch. So it's like the duality of those things is kind of like what you don't need any. It's so democratic, you know, that it just does its own thing. And I think the cool thing about that painting is how cheap it is. You know, and I think, like, you know, Dolly Parton has a quote, it takes a lot of money, it looks as cheap, it's like the same kind of thing, you know? But, yeah, I don't think about kitsch at all. If I did, my paintings would be terrible.
Yeah, me too. And most of what happens while doing it. So, can I ask you again a bit the question? So just because I have difficulty with
I was just interested in The Parents' Room, why you chose to take such a dark story and set it as a musical, for example. And there are many such examples or for example, Manelli, which involves a body being dragged across the floor, another being dropped, and you describe it as almost slapstick. And I'm just wondering about what is it that you find so interesting about this mixture of darkness and levity?
Yes, but my interest actually is never to the storytelling or the dramaturgy. So, for example, the parents' room, which present a fact, let's say. So the fathers say, I kill my son, I kill my daughter, and I kill my wife, and they appear and say, yeah, you kill me, yes, you kill me, and then he say, yes, but after all, I kill myself too. And this is simply exposing a fact that then I'm not so naive to know that it can't be can open to a several lecture or speculation about a numbers of stuff. But for example, for me was my way to get rid of a story and just focus on what I wanted to do. That was a musical and so on and so forth. So often for me it's just basically making film. It's like to set up a mechanism, a machine to make it works and rolls, and when it rolls at this point, you know, something appears. And sometimes if I feel that if I if my film production, let's say, can be the field for a promiscuity of languages, of codes, of figures. So at this point, when these machines rolls, something happens and appears, and this often this reveals itself like very uncanny or very disturbing, but because it is real, I think, or I like it to call this way, and so it shows itself as something very far and alienated from us, you know, the real, or what we, yeah.
Yeah, and maybe that takes me to my next question, which is Diego, that you often your films are written about as, in terms of structure, as being highly formalist. So they often, whether that be in their use of looping or a device like the flashing of certain scenes and darkness in Manelli. And I'm just wondering, because of course they also belong to a realm of genre cinema in terms of being horror, and what it is about that combination of taking the supposedly impersonal, like structuralism, and kind of mining it for its emotional or physical impact. Why that combination?
So I think that genre cinema, like horror, for example, since it has a very precise aim, which is scare people, for example, even the most boring or bad horror movies has something in the use of the audiovisual language that is a trick or something that is very interesting on a linguistic, and that's why on a side I'm very interested in genre cinema, because actually, even if it's probably the kind of cinema more into the distribution, the entertainment and the industry, and so also very narrative and so on, at the same time carry on the most interesting way to deal with the audiovisual language. On the other side, I think that mostly everything moved or is act now on a sentimental and emotional level. Also very important, if we can do a hierarchy issues, engage the audience, or if not the audience, who receive the inputs, let's say, on a very emotional level, also politics and so on. So I really think that the art should engage a lot with the sentimental level of it. And this is where genre, entertainment, certain kind of pop culture and so on, and children production, literature and film overlaps somehow for me.
And Jamian, on a kind of similar note, I'm thinking of a work like A Love I Can Feel that is, on the one hand, incredibly visceral. We've got this kind of body that's turning into a puddle, and yet a lot of it looks like almost clip art, or, you know, that it's highly mediated. And you've talked about that your work is, on the one hand, very personal, but nobody would necessarily get that from looking at it. I'm just wondering what it is about that mixture of the mediated and the personal that you keep coming back to.
Well, it's funny because, you know, when you think about painting, think about style, you know, and I really don't want to have a style at all. And it's funny because my earlier work was really heavily based on cartoons. And like, I don't like cartoons. I don't read comics. I don't care. I like that they're democratic, and I like that the line translates, like, you know what a cartoon is because it tells you what it is, you know? So it's like the simplest form of communication in terms of stupid painting, right? But that painting in particular is actually my twin. It's supposed to be a reference to my twin who's melting and burning the candle from both ends, you know?
Right.
So, you know, does it matter? No. You know, she was actually really annoyed that that was like her representation of herself through me, you know?
Oh, your literal twin,
yes.
not just a representation.
So,
right, sorry.
Yeah, so if you want to talk about like
Yeah.
duality and identity and
Yeah.
all that shit, you know, like, and all those things, it's all wrapped up into my personal narrative. But like I said, like, how self-centered could I be? Because who cares, you know? Like, I'm like, what you do is completely different, you know? Which is like, I had no idea that you did like a film like about like trauma as a musical. Like, that's a mind fuck, you know? You could really like build a story and like get really invested. Like, I'm assuming the thing is, you don't want to assume that your audience is stupid, but you have to assume that like I know that like people have really busy lives and art is kind of like its own thing. So I want to assume, you know, people look at something for like 3 seconds, 4 seconds. You know, if I could communicate in 3 or 4 seconds, then I did my job. You know?
Yeah.
It sounds like really like flippant.
No, yeah,
But
no,
I mean,
no,
like,
no.
that's like it's like really hard to do that. So if I can at least get somewhere around there, I'll feel like I did something on the
Yeah.
right track. You know what I mean?
So rather than setting yourself against forms of kind of vulgar or popular consumption, you sort of allow yourself to participate in them in a certain
You have
sense,
to.
and not
You don't have a choice. You know, that's how like the world works. You know, like the thing is, like if you make a painting, unfortunately, it's got to look good online. It's got to look good in person too. So like, if you're not thinking about those things when you're making work, you're missing the point of communicating an idea. Because the whole thing is paint. Like for me, my work is always like a means to an end for like the physical form. You know, I mean, I do other things other than painting, but you know what I mean?
Yeah, because exactly this is something very interesting for me in relation to the fact that I do works that develops in time. And I remember working with video, this is something I heard since when I was a teenager, not teenager, but young and art student, that often audience in art spaces don't stay longer in front of videos and film, and they always told me like be careful about that. And I always thought, why should I care? I mean, people are free to do whatever they want. If they enter a space where there is a video of mine installed and they go away after 3 seconds, I'm completely fine with it. That's like I really say that I don't think about the audience, but I think that not thinking about the audience is very respectful of the audience also. Like they can stay hours till that place closes, of course, if they want to stay, and they can even stay 1 minute, and it's fine for me, or 2, 3 seconds. I do another stuff. There are other people that should be, from my perspective, making feel concern about how you say, taking audience and seduce them and be there, are disciplines that of course are a lot interconnected with art also, but I try to so, and then there are people that enjoy, other than don't, but I'm completely fine with it. Yeah, right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. There's a kind of strange performance art going on here, that Jamian's half in and out of your jumper, and your chair is creeping gradually backwards as you talk. It's like we didn't plan this, but it's just happening. You know? Sorry, I didn't mean to make you feel self-conscious. So I think one of the really interesting things about both your works is the ways in which labour and the work of making work is kind of oddly central to certain practices. I'm thinking, Jamian, about the almost kind of masochistic, labour-intensive compiling of imagery that you engage in as a painter, and then more recently, you've almost taken a different masochistic position of submitting to a Chinese reproduction painter who actually made the works in your show at Gagosian, It. And then, Diego, I'm thinking of all of those bodies or figures like the moles in Dolly who are constantly counting and it never ends, or the kind of CGI figures who are forced to repeat and repeat and repeat their trauma in looping. And I'm just wondering what it is about that labor or the kind of repetition that you were trying to get at in those works, either of you. Yeah.
Well, for me, I've made paintings that have taken 80 hours, and I've thrown them out, and I don't make that many paintings a year. I make like 15. So I opened a gallery called O'Flaherty's, and because in my work, usually I'm like collaborating with images on the canvas because I'm doing it in real life. It seemed like decorative or gratuitous and a moot point to do it on the canvas. So the only way I could actually see my paintings without wanting to kill myself was removing myself from them and taking a step back. Because for me, it's always been about the idea, I'm not a fetishist, how do you say it, fetishist, of like form or painting, and the reason why my whole career, for the most part, I've been using acrylic and airbrush is because it's a removal of the hand and it's so cheap. Oil painting, it feels like there's no intentionality too. So I decided to like take a different route and take a step back, and now I can actually see what I'm doing, and that was kind of the whole point, the idea.
But to a certain extent, for both of you, there's something almost bad manners like about not painting your own paintings, or even before using airbrush in them. And certainly there's part of the uncanny effect of your work, Diego, is using animatronics, for example, in Dole instead of live actors. So there is something about removing your own hand or removing the human touch, which is both disturbing and maybe improper in both your practices. And I'm wondering what the reaction to that has been, or do you think that alters the meaning of the work?
You know what I'm thinking now? It's funny because like another thing that I think that we're probably both subconsciously thinking of is like you have to compete with real life, So like for me, for instance, I was thinking about AI, like kind of like the death of art. So how do you compete with that, And like I just think timing is something that we subconsciously think about, as artists, because we have to produce. So how do you like get somewhere in between? You know what I mean? I don't know.
Yeah. No, it's particularly true. As Jamian was saying, also. For example, I did a series of works some years ago that were camera-less animation, painted directly onto 60mm films, leader, and so it was even more than my works I did with with cells, painted cells. There was really a work of repetition and going to a frame to another for like days. And these was, but also when I did these animations like the little sick boy, which is just a little sick boy sick in the bed. So I painted a lot of these cells of his breaths because it was a traditional animation. In this kind of works, for me, there was an enormous pleasure of a completely disappearance of myself, as a if we can call it, to be really in a very disgusting way of my creative self, but it was just labor, just like, and this probably, it also what I meant with the bigger production, like the molds, the animatronic, that was really to design literally a machine that can work completely alone, and then to put in order on the timeline as it was designed, and then see if it was working. So there is something that for me is interesting. Then often happens that then when I see the work installed after the busy day of installing and so on, so I have some like epiphany, or I finally see what is the work, what the piece carries, with it. Some are still surprise me, some less, but I think this part of the repetition in the process is very important to get rid of myself somehow.
I'm going to ask you a question which I think you've been asked before, Diego. and it's part of the reason I was terrified to meet you, having seen your work, which is, why all the images of children suffering or stuck in situation? I'm thinking of a work like Ludwig, where there's this child in the kind of hull of a ship, lit by a match, talking about his situation, and the match goes out and it disappears. Or, for example, the young girls in Monelli who are seemingly perhaps trapped inside this fascist building. Why childhood as this kind of recurring? I'm assuming it's a structural reason. It's a kind of device of some kind in your work.
See, it's no, because it's very hard now to speak about children suffering, especially in these years where we see a lot of dramatic children, and not only children suffering coming from Gaza, but let's say that I will skip this.
Okay, sure. Jamian, I'm interested in, of course, a certain ugliness or grotesquerie has satiric effects. And I'm just wondering if you see your work as ever engaged in a kind of satiric sort of engagement with consumer culture or popular culture. I'm thinking of work like Chef Mike, where you put a microwave into Norman Rockwell painting, Freedom from Want, I think it's called. Yeah. Do you see yourself as engaged in a kind of satiric practice as well? No.
I take it completely. It's like hardcore shit, I use the microwave all the time. Like, I love the microwave. That's why that's there, I wouldn't be doing this if I thought it was like some kind of joke. I take all my jokes very seriously. So it may look like a joke, but it never is. It's just disguised as one.
And you're never worried about the idea, for example, with an image like SpaghettiOs, of in a more recent show, of taking something that's potentially low or vulgar or associated with kind of mass consumption, putting it in an art context. And because, I mean, even with kind of pop art, there's a certain cool detachment sometimes that might seem almost sneering in its critique, but it seems like your engagement with these things are much more idiosyncratic and kind of weird.
It's funny because like, I love SpaghettiOs, straight up. And it's funny, this sounds really stupid of me, but every time I go to another country, I always go to fucking Burger King, because it's like a standard that I could expect, you know what I mean? You know what you're getting into. So it's something that I'm familiar with. And that's the thing, when I'm making work, even if it seems really far, it has to feel close, And there's like an intimacy there, even though it is disguised as something stupid, or gross. Like, what the fuck does even gross even mean to who? You know what I mean? Like, people do weird shit all day. Who's the judge?
Do you put the SpaghettiOs in the microwave?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Just like cold SpaghettiOs would be too far for me. That would be gross.
I'm gonna cook them. Jesus Christ! It's Chef Mike.
Okay. Yeah.
Maybe I can say something on spaghetti since I am Italian.
Yeah.
Did the painting offend you horribly? Both of you, to kind of return to the theme of the panel, although we've never really left it, is the function of the uncanny in both your work. I'm thinking, Jamian, of course, there are all of these doublings and twinnings in your work, whether in Elvis and Me or A Love I Can Feel, yeah. Or there are various other works. There's a work where there's two sort of almost Amish children together. Yeah. And so I'm just wondering why this recurrence of doubling within your work. And then I'll try and separate out the questions, because I've got one for you. Yeah.
Well, I grew up in a silkscreen factory because that's what my parents do. So they just make T-shirts all day long. So growing up in like a factory that did that, plus being a twin, it just seemed like natural, like I couldn't help it. And I tried to avoid being in my family business forever because, working with families is always a nightmare. And it came out somehow, and this is what it is. So I also think, like, seeing images being repurposed and reused all day long, you know, and having multiple different lives was really important to me because I remembered it. You know, my memory's garbage, but seeing something over and over again, it really like drilled it into my head. And like I said, like being a twin has its own set of duality, intense problems, which is like about identity, and it's a lot. So I think it just was natural for me, and I didn't really have a choice, you know? Yeah.
But you've also talked about your love of Mike Kelly's work, and of course Mike Kelly's an artist very much associated with the uncanny. He curated a show on that, and one of his interesting ideas was this idea of the uncanniness of collecting, of almost feeling this compulsion to collect signs that would then speak for you, so you've got this kind of almost you are possessed by these things that are not you, and you've talked very much about your art as being personal but also not having a style. So I'm wondering if there's anything about that idea of collecting that's
So basically I you know, I think there's a similarity, you know, and I'm not trying to like historically align myself, but it's something I've been thinking about for a long time is, you know, with Mike's work and with my work, it's all about ephemera. We're like tornadoes of ephemera. And it's always about the idea, and somehow it manifests into a physical object. So I think, and also based off of memory and childhood, because I had a very complicated childhood, you know, and I think everyone kind of relates to that. Everyone experienced some form of trauma, you know, like I have a twin, and she's had her 4th baby, and I was teaching the baby how to swim. And I was trying to help the baby get out of the pool, and, you know, trying to help, let them do themselves. And if they hit their chin in that 1 second, they'd probably remember that for the rest of their lives, and it could fuck them up. You know, so just thinking about something as simple as that, like I said, those are personal things, but it's always about like the tornado of ephemera, collecting things, because it's a removal of self and it's democratic. And it's also just obsessiveness. Like, I love stuff. I love stuff. I like looking at stuff. I like learning about shit. And I like things that are discarded just as much as I like something that's elevated. It's all the same to me, you know? And that's the way I should look at something. You know what I mean? If it's always this, it's all the same shit. It just depends on whatever.
Diego, the uncanny works quite differently in your work. I'm thinking, for example, of, we've already mentioned the kind of use of animatronics, or in a work like Manele, where, you know, the action takes place just in short flashes. So you might think you've seen something, but you're not quite sure. You mix. So Manele, for those who haven't seen it, takes place in a formerly fascist administrative building in Como, and features a group of girls that we see sleeping, but also then sometimes CGI figures. Another work like The Parents' Room, which we've already discussed, you have live actors, but they're wearing masks. And so there are all of these kind of doublings in each of these films. I'm wondering what it is you're trying to explore through the use of the uncanny, or this uncertainty of the real or the imitative in your works. Does it differ across them, or?
Yeah, many of my formal aesthetical choices actually are driven by really pragmatical things. For example, I don't want to relate with actors. So, for example, in Monelle, the young girls were asleep. So.
And they're complaining about lines, or
And in the Parents' Room, instead, I wanted to do stop motion animation, but I don't like the fact that stop motion animation, for its very own nature, is always a bit flickering, because it consists in taking photos of the object or the moved, no, and then one reproduced it moves, and plus these things that I don't want to work with the actors. I thought, well, but if I do one human scale puppets and I make them be acted and animated by performer inside of them, so at this point both of the problem are solved, because on a side I would have puppets very well animated, you know, and on the other side, the actors will be fully covered by a mask that won't allow them to express themselves. So basically, I don't have to engage in a discussion with them to see what to do and so on and so forth. And this I can do example of that with other films and works you haven't, you know, quoted and so on, just to say that I like these things that happens that very visceral, even if very stupid, maybe desires, like not having actors on the set, but wanted to have a set and to work on a film production, actually then brings, you know, formal aspect that then becomes really fundamental of the work. But this is, for me, is very interesting because basically underlines how form and content are, of course, very connected. How there is not like meaning behind the stuff, the things, but are the things themselves that brings meanings. You know what I mean? So, yeah.
But is it ever, for example, in something like, I mean, I keep on mentioning the parents' room, but is it ever about a kind of distancing effect at all? This kind of inhuman quality, because it's still very disturbing. You know? Is it a kind of almost an alienation effect, a kind of barrier?
Yes, yeah. But yes, I mean, it is. I was just trying to say that how to say? It's not it's not an aim. It's not like that. I was there like thinking like, oh, I can make, you know, like, and so let's put some mask and so on. It's more really melted with the process itself. It was like the moles. This is very funny for me. We were actually, Dolle, you say these films with a family of moles counting endlessly. We were still working on the parents' room, coloring the masks of the parents' room performers, and we were doing this in the countryside where Lorenzo Cianchi, one of my collaborators, has a workshop, you know, in the Tuscany, and I was seated in the grass smoking, because at the time I was still smoking, and I remember I told him, oh, it will be funny to see two moles counting endlessly, and we laugh, and then I thought, it's not such a bad idea, and it's just like that started. So I talked about the film, blah, 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 then it became a fully animated set programmed prior to the animatronics robot that we made, engineered, programmed, and so on and so forth. And then when I saw it, then all of these echoes, somehow everything echoes, mirrors, you know, and brings. So it's like the moles came to me much more than I thought like, oh, I want blah, blah, blah. So moles are a perfect figure or element or subject for it.
Both of you have recently kind of seemingly, I mean, maybe I'm wrong, simplified your practices, or at least, for example, Jamian, I'm thinking about the kind of visual excess of a hat on a hat and a hat of images in some of your earlier work, and then more recently at IT, there are works like Tuxedo, which are incredibly simple, or Spaghettios. And again, with you, Diego, that work like Fritz, which just has a single CGI figure, a very limited routine of kind of actions. You both seem to be sort of retreating from the excessive, or this kind of overwhelm that characterizes some of your other works, and I'm wondering why that is.
I mean, for me, I just feel like it's just me maturing as an artist, you know? When I started, like, my thing was like minimalism, you know? But you would never know that, you know? So I feel like now I'm finally coming into myself, and what I'm interested in, you know? And it's not like some premeditated thing.
Right.
It's just, you know, like doing it in real life. You know what I mean?
Yeah, me too. Because if it's true that there are pieces like Fritz, which are very dry or simple, let's say, a piece like Dolle, which is quite close, or La Gola, which is even closer in time. I mean, it's more complicated. Yeah. Sometimes these shorter pieces or more, this kind of kind of a fall from a big, from a bigger. No, this is not very. I realized it was not very interesting.
Say something interesting, Diego. Come on, we're being recorded.
No. But just,
no, but I feel you. I know what you mean.
You know, yeah. So, okay, so
totally.
The kind of difficult.
The audience.
Totally, yeah, exactly. Sorry, guys.
Right.
Totally.
Okay. Yeah, I suppose it's interesting though, because on a panel, I feel like we're almost at a kind of productive impasse here, where on the one hand, discussing horror or the grotesque or the ugly in some way presumes an audience that will be horrified, disgusted, moved, or affected. And yet both of you come from this position of either you are that audience or you're almost indifferent to its effect upon your audience. I'm just wondering, are you conscious, is there ever on a kind of personal level a kind of consciousness of, I suppose there's productive bad taste, good bad taste, and bad taste. And I'm wondering, for example, Jamian, where you draw that line between a work that you've said before you make something, you're like, oh my God, what the hell have I made? Yeah. And how you judge whether you put that out into the world or whether it's a kind of horror that you, it's too horrific to show to anybody. What is that kind of boundary? What is that kind of check?
Well, I feel like, you know, there's like I said, I think that there's a shelf life to an idea. And the second I overthink it, or I don't go with my gut. Usually, my gut is usually right. You know, usually everyone's gut's usually right. It's like the first thing you thought of, just do that. And I think if you start second-guessing yourself and thinking about good or bad or any of these things, it fucks up the whole thing. You know, like, it's supposed to be, like, freedom of expression regardless of whatever it is. And also, like, who am I to draw that line? It's about my personal taste. It's not about what I'm trying to do, you know? So it's something to think about, but it's not the main point, and I think it's a misstep. I mean, of course, I'm aware if I'm making something that's kind of like questionable. That's why I'm doing it, because it's supposed to be questionable. Like, I'm questioning it myself, you know?
Then it becomes about
experience.
Yeah, experience. Yeah. And Diego, I suppose there's something I want to push back a little bit about this thought about audience, because of course, you know, horror, which is one of the genres that you kind of reference, is like pornography in a sense, that it tries to elicit a response from its audience, a physical response. But you say that it's not something you think about primarily, or is it?
The audience, you mean? Yeah. But with this, I mean, I mean, also because also now, if you want to speak about the audience, you know,
and we make you do it.
It seems we want to speak about it. But if we, who is the audience? I really have. Maybe it's just my, as I was saying before. Please, that I keep asking. Please, can you say again the question, because I have difficulty with abstracting, or I lost. So I really have difficulty to grab the audience, what it means, because it's full of subjectivities that I can't, but literally I can't, if not in a very generic way, try to decide to decide who is my audience, or to whom I want to address my work, which is something that it doesn't really interest me. No? So it's simply this. I can maybe this is very simple, but I can't think about the audience because I literally don't understand what the audience is. You know, if not in a really generic way, that is not helpful for it. Doesn't. So of course, I refer thinking about the language and the pieces just to me or to my very close actually person, no? That I share ideas and talk with, or films with, that I can have an actual dialogue like me and you in this moment, and like us, you know what I mean? So a really small audience in this case. So the effect of this genre and the codes they use or share and blah 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 are I see them only on me somehow, and the way so in this way I feel my work is very actually the gaze of my work is really inside, you know, towards me, and probably this is the only audience. And for an extension, of course, I am part of an audience that share a common background and so on and so forth. And this probably is the only direct audience I can have an access. But simply, really, because I can't, I don't understand what yeah. And this, sorry, just to put the dot on the E, like we say in Italian, is once again, I think I love to think as respectful about the audience. I respect, like you respect someone you know you don't
Totally
disturb.
You don't think, yeah, just respect.
So maybe then the ultimate in the kind of ugly or the grotesque is in a certain sense talking down to one's audience or assuming something of them or particularizing them rather than assuming a kind of democracy of taste in which people can cope with a lot and people are you talked about it assuming a certain kind of stupidity from the audience, but also a stupidity that is if this is not too paradoxical, capable of insight. They'll go with what you're going with, and not moralize or judge it.
Well, I think that's the thing. Once you start differentiating what's what, at O'Flaherty's we did a show where anyone could bring in art as long as it was this size, and it could, you know, you could bring it and we'd hang it, you know. And there was like 1,128 artworks, and you know, they're not all good, clearly, you know what I mean? And I realized once garbage starts touching garbage, it starts looking good. You know?
Okay, I think maybe that's a really great place to end between the... before we start looking like bad garbage instead of good garbage. And I think that's about time, isn't it? So, yeah. Thank you all for coming. Thank you, guys. And thank you, Jamian and Diego.